All right, folks, welcome back. In our last section, we've managed to set up our Stripe account and we've successfully let the user make a payment, which is really, really good. Now that we can accept payment, let's actually deliver what we promised, right? So remember, we were here, they made a payment, it went through, and we took them back to here where we show them the payment success modal. Now, the next step for the user is going to be choosing a unique name for their page. So let's come back to our code and create the API endpoint for creating the love page. So let's open under our API folder, under love page, under create, we have a route.js file which is currently empty. So let's complete that. Let's say export async function post, because this is a post action. And let's open that. Let's open a try catch block. And in here, let's say const user ID slug. Let's grab those two first. Await rec.json. And let me actually put them side by side so you can see it better, right? We are passing these two here, so we're just catching them here. And then let's do some basic validation first. Let's check if there's no user or there's no slug. Let's just return response.json error with a error message that says missing required fields, and the status code is going to be 400. And then let's check if the user exists and has paid. Technically, they should at this point, but it's safer to add this extra layer of protection. So let's say const user is equal to await prisma, import prisma, the user, the find unique, where the condition is ID is equal to user ID. And what we want to include is the order field. So order true. Okay. Then if there's no user for some reason, we'll return response.json with an error message that says user not found, and give it a status code of 404, not found. If there's no user.order.is paid, so if this value turns out to be false, let's say return response.json with an error message payment required, and also the status code is going to be 403. Then let's check if the slug is already taken first. So let's say const existing page is equal to await prisma dot love page. Remember, we have that model dot find unique, where the condition is going to be slug. Just to jog your memory, let's take a look at our schema here. So we are creating our love page table. All right, let's come back here. And we'll say if this value is true, so another user has taken this name already, we'll just say return response.json with an error message that says this name is already taken, with a status code of 400. Now we can finally get into the business. So let's say create the new love page for this user, and I'm gonna open the schema and put it on the side so you can have a reference while we go through this step. Let's say const love page, let's say await prisma dot love page dot create. Okay, so let's say data, we need the user ID, the slug, which we have, and the content. So our content is a JSON, and by default, here is how we're gonna construct it. So this part is a little bit long, but stay with me. So let's say steps, and then open an array. The first step being the ID is equal to 1. The type is gonna be simple. And the title will be, will you be my Valentine? The options are, let's open an array with 2 options. So the first one with an ID of yes, yes, and the text is going to be yes, the capital Y. And the second option, ID is no. The text is going to be I know no. One with that text emoji that I'm just going to copy and paste it here because I don't know how to type that out. All right, and let me correct the typos. Options. Okay. So after options, let's say image is gonna be source will be /please.gif, and the alt tag is just gonna be please. All right, so that's our first step. Second step, with an ID of 2, the type will be conditional, and condition, let's say Q1 yes. Title will be thank you, and the subtitle I put it as don't go yet, The image, let's open that and say source is equal to /ris.gif, and the alt tag is ris. And then the options array will just be one option that says ID is yes. The text is click me. There you go. And then step 3 with the type being conditional again. And the condition will be question1 no. And the image object, let's open that, and it'll be source sad gif. And the alt tag will be sad. All right, step 4. So the ID is 4, and the type will be calendar, and the title is gonna be are you free on ... and the subtitle is gonna be select a date, and requires date, let's set this boolean to be true, and the button text is gonna be submit. And then step 5, the type is gonna be grid, the title will be what food would you like to eat, and the button text will be continue, and our options is going to be an array. So because there's a lot, if you remember, I'm just going to copy them and paste it here. You can take a look or pause the video. Okay, and let's continue. Step 6. The type is still grid, and the title, which says which dessert are we eating, the button text is still continue, and the options array, let me again just copy and paste them because there's a lot. All right, so step 7, the type grid again, and the title that says what would you like to do after, And the button text is still continue. And again, options array with all of the activities options. So let me just put them here. You can take a look. All right, so our final step, so ID is equal to 8, and the type will be final. And the title will say, thank you for being my girlfriend, with that text emoji, which I'm just gonna paste it here. And then the image object will say source is equal to slash final.gif, and the alt tag is going to be final. After the closing square bracket, let's say settings, it's going to be current step 1. So we start at step 1. And after 1 closing curly brace, 2 closing curly brace, let's say responses, and let's just initialize an empty response object here. And finally, let's do published false by default. All right, so after we initialized the love page for our user, let's say return the response.json with the love page. And in our catch block, let's just say console.error, and with an error message that says error creating love page error. And we'll also have to return the response.json with an error message that says something went wrong, with a status code of 500. All right, let's give it a go and come back to our page, and let's just pick a name. And because we are the first and the only user, we can literally pick any name. So I'm just gonna pick Jenny like that, and I'll hit start creating. So what's gonna happen once we click the button? Well, let's take a look here. In the modal, if everything goes as planned, the endpoint is gonna be called, and data will be returned, and on success, we're going to be pushed to the /editor/ our dynamic data.slug route, which we have it right now, but it's just an empty page. But at least let's see if we can get to that empty page. And by the way, I just realized that I'm missing something here. So let's add the on error. So on error, let's say error, and then open that. First, let's just console.log it. So error.response.data, and then we'll make a toast to let the user know what's happening. So toast.error, a message that says error creating the page, and then we can add the description here that says error.response optional .data.error if we have that. If not, then we just say please try again. All right, let's come back to our page and give it a go. And let me actually open the inspection to see what's happening under the network tab. And let's say Jenny, and hit the start creating button. And it seems like we have an error. Let's take a look. All right, guess what? I found the culprit, which is a typo in my schema.prisma. Basically, I typed instead of responses, I missed the S here. It's so hard to notice those typos, my gosh. But hopefully you typed that correctly and you didn't get this error at all. But if you did, what I did was just open the terminal and see what's happening here. It's complaining, saying the payload argument must be of type object received null. And then I was like, okay, let's check out our network tab. And under the payload, seems like I'm sending the correct payload. So what went wrong? And eventually you just realize that you made a typo. Let me fix that right now. Let me cut this and let me correct this to be responses. And because I've made changes to the schema, I need to push it again. I'm going to do npx prisma db push. Okay, so let me turn it back on again and give it another try. So let's come back here and refresh this page. Right, let's just do that again. And let me clear this. Okay, let's start creating. And look at that. We have successfully created the page. And as you can see here, the create endpoint has a status of 200, which means that's all good. And if we click on that, we see the payload that we sent. We can see the responses here. Awesome. We can finally move on to our next step, which is creating the editor. Now let's check off the setup Stripe account step. We've done that, and now we're on to the create editor. So let's do that together. So let's come back to our code and open our under editor, under slug, page.js. So we can close this for now. So this page.js file is going to be an async function, and let's get our params here. Remember, in the mutate function, we are returning the user to this route with a dynamic slug, and we need to grab that here. So let's say const slug is equal to await params. And I believe we need to add this await because we're using Next.js 15 now. Under the return, we'll say max with wrapper with a class name of margin bottom 12, margin top 8. And inside, we're going to create something called editable quiz with the page slug being the slug. We're going to pass it down. And let's create this component now. So under components, we'll say editable quiz.js and just do RFC to get the skeleton going. So this component is going to look very similar to our homepage, except in here, everything is going to be editable. So let's come in here and let's say const and just leave it empty for now. And then let's say use query from 10 stack query, import that. And we'll say query key is equal to love page with the page slug, and the query function is going to be an async function. And in here, let's grab the data from this endpoint. Await axials, import axials dot get slash API slash love page question mark slug equals page slug. And remember, we need to receive that page slug here. And because we're using use query, let's add the use client on top of the file. Now we can grab the data. Let's name it love page. Also, let's grab the is pending state. And here I made another typo. At least it tells me that I made a typo. So this endpoint is going to be at the root level of love page. So I'm just going to create that file. And let's worry about this endpoint in a minute. For now, let's finish this part. So we will return the data after we get it. And we want to say enabled because we only want to run this query when there is a page slug. Otherwise, don't even bother. Let's say if is pending, then we want to return a simple loading state. Let's open a div with a class name of flex, item center, justify center, and then inside just a simple loader icon from Lucy React, and give it a class name of size 6, animate spin. There you go. And like I said, it's going to be very similar to our homepage. So let's create the const render current step function. So render current step and open this function. And I will say const current step is equal to love page that we got from calling this endpoint dot content dot settings dot current step. And let's just add a console log here to see that we are actually getting that. So current step. And then we want to find the current step data. So let's say const step data is equal to love page dot content dot steps dot find. And how do we find it? Step dot id is equal to current step. That's how we find the data that's corresponding to the step. And then we can open a switch operator depending on which step are we on. And similarly, we'll do case 1 and case 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc., etc. So case 1 will return the editable question 1, and we'll pass the page slug to this component. So page slug as well as the step data equals step data. And we'll add more cases as we go, but under the return we'll say render current step, like that. And let's finish our endpoint now. So come back to this route.js and say export async function get, and again open a try catch block, and let's say const session is equal to await get auth session, import that. If there's no user, so if no session dot user dot id, we'll return response.json with an error message that says unauthorized and a status code of 401, unauthorized. Then we'll say const search params. So grab the search params from new URL rec.url, and then const slug is equal to search params dot get slug. And if there's no slug for some reason, I'll say return response.json with an error message, slug is required. Otherwise, how can we know what to render for you, right? With a status code of 400, and then we will find the page and make sure that it belongs to our current user. So let's say const love page is equal to await prisma, import that, prisma.lovepage.find unique, where the condition will be slug, that's unique, and also user ID, which is session.user.id. So we're making sure the page belongs to the requesting user. And if for some reason there's no such love page, we'll just return response.json with an error message that says page not found and a status code of 404. And if we have reached this point, we'll just return response.json love page. And inside the catch block, we'll just say console.error fetching your love page, right? Error, and return a response.json and a message that says something went wrong, and the status code 500. All right, now let's come back to our editable quiz component, and we need to create this component. We don't have this yet. So under components, I created a folder and then call it editable questions, and I'm gonna put it in here. So create a new file and call it editable question1.js, and let's do rfce to create the skeleton, and let's construct the first question. So let's say get rid of that and then give it a class name of text center, and in here we need a form because everything is editable, and whenever user makes a change we need to submit that form. So let's say form We don't need this action. And inside this form, let's open a div with a class name of flex item center gap 8. And inside this div, open another div with a class name of relative margin x auto with fit flex 1. Let's add an input field, import that from our UI, and this is a self-closing component. First, let's give it a class name of text 5 extra large font bold, text brand, tracking wide, text center rounded extra large, and border dashed, just to make sure that it actually applies, and border 2, and border brand /30, so 30% opacity, and on hover a border brand /60, and on focus let's say border brand, and give it a minimum width of 600 pixels, so 600 pixels, padding 8 all around, and padding right 16. And above this class name, we need to track whatever user inputs, right? So because we are going to use React hook form, so let's just come up here above the return statement, and let's say const, let's call use form, and import that from React hook form, and open that, and give it a default values, and open that. Let's say title is going to be step data, and don't forget to receive those from our parent component. So page slug, remember we're passing the page slug and step data, so page slug and step data, and we'll say title by default is going to be step data dot title, or just empty string, and the image file is going to be null by default. We'll handle that in a minute. So that now we can come to our input and say register, and I need to actually include that. So register, handle submit. We also need to grab the reset and watch, as well as form state. So let's get the errors and is dirty to watch the changes. So now we can come down to our input field and say register title, because we call it title here. So title, and the required value is gonna be true, and the message will just simply say this is required. Then below this input tag, let's say errors dot title. If that exists, then we'll render a little warning like we did before. So open a p tag and then just render errors dot title dot message, and give this p tag a class name of text red 500 and a text small. And below that, add a little icon from Lucid, so pencil, and a class name of size 6, text brand /40, absolute right 4. So it's going to be positioned absolute to this div. Okay, so right for top 1/2 minus translate y 1/2, and then pointer events none. Let's close that. And below this closing div, let's open another div with a class name of flex item center, and in here let's create a button, import that. So this button, the type is gonna be the type is gonna be submit, and variant is gonna be outline. The size, we'll just say icon, so a little bit smaller, and a class name of transition opacity. And if the user actually made a change, right, so is dirty, then we'll say opacity 100. So show that. Otherwise, we kind of just want to hide it by doing this trick of opacity 0. I'm just going to put save right here. We're going to handle the different situations. So if it's pending, we're going to put a loader here. If not, we're going to put a check icon. But for now, I'm just going to put save here. And just to recap a little bit, we have this page.js file where we're rendering the sort of the homepage, but for the editable version, right? So we have this editable quiz where it's going to render different editable questions depending on which step we have. And inside this component, first of all, we fetch the content of this love page for this specific user. And then we grab the specific data which corresponds to the current step and then pass it to each individual editable question. And now we're on editable question 1. So let's take a look what we have, and don't forget to import those components, otherwise it's gonna give you an error. So let's come back to our page, and we see we have sort of something working, right? So we have an input, and when we hover over, it's gonna highlight to indicate to the user that this is something that you can edit. And did you see that when I start typing stuff, this button shows up, right? This is what the is dirty is doing. So it's kind of listening. The user makes some changes, the button will actually show. And it seems like the text 5 extra large we set here didn't really take effect, and that's because the input component we're using from Chatzian has its default styling. So let's come here and edit this class name so that it actually matches what we're expecting. So let's get rid of this medium and above text small, which was interfering with our own class name, as well as the focus visible ring 1, focus visible ring, just delete those. So now when we click on the input and it's in focus mode, it doesn't have that black border we saw earlier. Okay, let's carry on building out our editable question 1. So after 1 closing div, 2 closing div, let's open a new div with a class name of flex, item center, justify center, gap 4, margin top 6, and inside let's iterate through the step data dot options dot map, and for each option we want to return something. So let's say we'll return a div in here, and we need to give it a key. It's going to be option.id, and give it a class name of group relative, and this should be an equal sign here. In here, let's add a button, and we'll render option.text. And for this button, we'll just say size is gonna be large. And we'll see exactly what we saw earlier in our homepage, except now we're displaying the data that we fetched from our database. All right, let's come back to our code, and below this div, let's open a new div with a class name of flex, relative, item center, justify center, and margin top 10. And inside another div, this is where we're going to show the image, except now we're also going to let user upload their own image. So let's see how we're going to do that. So minus margin -2, rounded extra large, bg gray 900/5. You can probably just copy from your previous component, and padding 2, ring 1, ring inset, ring gray 900/10, and on large and above minus margin 4, on large and above rounded 2 extra large, on large and above padding 4. Let's create a label. So label, the HTML4 attribute will say image file, and let's give it a class name of relative, group, cursor, pointer, and block. And right now we need to come up to the top and add a few more things. So first we need the query client from use query client. Import that from 10stat query. We also need to set the state for something called preview. Like imagine when your user uploads an image, they expect to see the preview of what they just uploaded, right? So let's say preview, and then set preview is equal to use state. Import that, and by default it's going to be null. And then we can come down here to where we were, and then let's say if there is preview, we're going to render the preview. Otherwise, we'll just render what we get from the database. So If we have preview, we'll open an image tag. Source is going to be preview. And the alt tag, we can just give it preview. Let's also give a class name of width full, height full, rounded extra large, transition all, duration 200. On group hover, we'll say brightness 50. And then if the is pending state is true, we don't have this yet because we need to construct our using mutation function, but we'll just put it here in case we forget. So if is pending is true, then we want to say brightness 50, otherwise nothing. And if there's no preview, well, let's just render an image with the source being step data.image.source, or, and let's give it a fallback, so slash please.gif, and the alt tag will be step data.image.alt, and again give it a fallback of please. And then the class name, same thing here, we'll say width full, rounded extra large, transition all, duration 200, on group hover, brightness 50, and if it's pending, we'll say brightness 50, otherwise nothing. Below this ternary operation, let's open a div with a class name of absolute, inset 0, flex, item center, justify center, opacity 0, on group hover, opacity 100, and transition opacity. Inside another div with a class name of bg white slash 30% opacity, backdrop blur small, padding 3 all around, and rounded full. And inside we just need an image plus icon from Lucy React with a class name of size 6, text white. And below this div, let's say if it's pending, then we want to render something. So render a div with a class name of absolute, inset 0, flex, item center, justify center, with a simple loader icon with a class name of size 6, animate spin, text white. And below this, let's add a hidden input. So let's just say input and give it an ID of image file. The type is going to be file, and the name will be image file, and give it a class name of hidden. And the accept attribute will say, we'll accept anything that's an image. So image slash start. Let's say register image file, because remember we have set the default values and we call it image file. So for the onChange listener, const file, let's grab the file first. So from the event.target.files and the first item. And if there's file, we'll call something called handle submit on submit, and we'll call that. And let's also add an area label for better accessibility that says upload image file. Then after the form, let's add a button that says next step. And for this button, we'll give it a variant of outline. Size will be large, and class name margin top 20. And on click, we'll simply call a function called go to next step. All right, let's come back up, and we'll say const on submit is equal to, you've seen this before, so let's construct the payload first. The payload is going to be, the title will be data.title, comes from React hook form, and the image file will be data.imagefile, and then grab the first item. And then we're going to call a function called save question This will be our mutation function, and then pass the payload. All right, so come up here and we'll say this will be the mutation to save the edits. And let's open our mutate. This will be save question. The is pending, let's grab that as well. And then let's say use mutation, import that from 10 stack query. The mutation function is going to be an async function with title, image file. And first, let's say let file URL equals step data.image.source. So basically we're using the existing image if there's no new image being uploaded. And then we'll say if image file exists, we'll instantiate a new form data first. So form data is equal to new form data, and then form data dot append image file and the image file itself. And now we're going to utilize something called AWS S3 bucket. So we'll say const upload response is equal to await axials, import that dot post. The endpoint we're going to define it as /API/S3 upload, and we'll attach the form data. So after that's uploaded, we will set the file URL to be upload response.data.file URL. Now here's a quick homework for you. In order for us to use the S3 bucket, we'll need to have these 4 keys. I'm not going to walk you through the steps on how to do this one because it's really simple and you need to learn how to figure shit out when you're building out your own apps. So pause here, go grab these 4 keys and come back. Alright, at this point I assume you've acquired those 4 keys. Let's construct the endpoint together. So under API folder, let's create a new folder called S3-upload and also create a file called route.js. Now first thing first, let's open our terminal and let's do npm install AWS-SDK. You can already see that. So AWS-SDK/client-S3. So let's install this. Let's instantiate a new S3 client. So I'll say const S3 client is equal to new S3 client, and let's import that. And I don't want it to be like that, so let's say import S3 client as well as the put object command from this library. And I'll say region will be the process.env.aws S3 region, so the region that you set, and the credentials will be an object which has an access key ID, and that's going to be process.env.aws S3 access key ID, and a secret access key will be process.env.aws S3 secret access key. And below we'll say export async function post. And let's open a try catch block again, and we'll say const form data is equal to await rec.form data. And just so we can see better, let me put it side by side so you can see what we're doing here, right? We're calling this endpoint and with the form data being sent, and we'll say const file is equal to form data.get image file, right? Because we appended here image file, make sure it matches. And if there's no file, we'll say return new response with no file found in request message and a status code of 400. Otherwise, we'll continue on and say const buffer is equal to buffer.from await file.array buffer And then the content type, const content type, we can get it from file.type. And finally, we can call a function to upload our file to the S3 bucket. So we'll call await upload file to S3, and let's create this function right now. So async function upload file to S3, and we're going to receive a few arguments here, including the file name, and the content type. So let's open this for now, which means we need to pass it here. So we'll pass the buffer, the file dot name, as well as the content type. And the result of calling this function will say const file URL is equal to this. And eventually we're going to return a new response, json.stringify the file URL, so that we can grab that in our front end. And let's also give it a status code of 200. And in the catch block, we'll say console.error with an error message saying error uploading to S3 and the error. And we'll also return a new response with a message saying error uploading to S3 and a status code of 500. Now let's finish off our function here. We'll set the file to be file buffer. So const file buffer is equal to file. And then let's construct the params. So the params will be an object with bucket being process.env.aws s3 bucket name. And then the key will be love page. This is how I defined it. So love page slash a dynamic value, which will be the file name. Then the body will be file buffer, and the content type will just be content type. And we'll say const command is equal to new put object command, and then pass the params. And this should be put object, not pub. And then we'll just say await S3 client, the client that we instantiated here. So S3 client dot send. We'll invoke the send function, so command. And finally, we'll return a link. So let's return HTTPS. First of all, the process.env.aws s3 bucket name dot s3 dot process.env.aws s3 region, and then dot amazon aws.com slash love page slash your actual file name. All right, let's come back to our front end and complete our mutation function. So we'll be able to update everything. So we'll say const data. We're going to call another endpoint. So let's say await axios.patch. And the endpoint will be slash API slash love page slash update question mark. So the slug will be page slug. In the body, we'll say step ID will be 1. And let's also include the updates. So the updates is an object which has the title and the image, with the source being file URL, and the alt, I just left it as image. And finally, we can return the data. Let's also handle the on success and on error. So on success, we'll say data. We'll make a success toast like before. So let me grab the import here first. And then how we make a toast is like that. So here, make a toast first. And instead of page created, we'll say changes saved. And the description will say your changes have been saved successfully. And after the toast, we'll say query client.invalidate queries, so that we can force a refresh to get the latest data. The query key that we defined before, if you remember, we called it love page and then page slug. then we'll also reset the values. So we have the reset here from React hook form. We can use that. So say reset. The title, it's going to be data.content.steps at index 0.title, and the image file will be null again. Also, we want to set the preview to be null. And if anything went wrong, let's say on error, we just log the error first. So console.log error saving question error.response.data, and let's also make a toast to let the user know. So toast.error, something went wrong, and the description will just say please try again later. We're almost there, so we also need to create that function which takes the user to the next step, right? Remember, we have this go to next step function. Let's create that now. So below this mutation to save the edits, let's add a new mutation to go to the next step. We'll say const mutate, and let's name it go to next step. And the same thing here, so use mutation. The mutation function will be, again, an async function, and inside we'll say const await axios.patch, and we're actually calling the same endpoint. So /API /love page /update question mark slug is equal to page slug, except the body is slightly different. So we'll say update settings is equal to true, then updates we'll say settings, and the current step we'll change that to 2, and we'll grab the data and then return it. Let's also handle the on success. So on success, we'll do query client dot invalidate queries, and the query key is love page slug. And lastly, we'll need to look at the changes of the image file and setting the preview. And in order to do that, let's come up here, and then we'll say const selected image file is equal to watch image file, and then const image file type is equal to selected image file, and grab the first item dot type dot split. So we'll split it by the slash, and then grab the first item. And we'll add a comment here that says, look at changes of the image file and set the preview. So let's use effect hook. And the dependency array will be the selected image file. Inside we'll check. So if selected image file dot 0, so if this exists, and then we'll check if the image file type is equal to image, if it's actually an image, not a text file or a PDF or whatever. And we'll say const reader is equal to new file reader, and then reader dot onload end is equal to this function here. Let's open that, and we'll set the preview to be reader.result. And lastly, we'll say reader.read as data URL, and we'll pass the selected image file at index 0. Else, we'll just set the preview to null. So set preview to null. All right, you know what we need to do next, which is to construct this endpoint. So let's come to our API folder. Under API, under love page, let's create a new folder and then call it update. And we need to create a new file, route.js. We'll say export async function patch, and inside, again, a try catch block. And first we'll do const session is equal to await get auth session, import that. And if there's no session, page.user.id will return a response.json with an error message unauthorized, and the status code is 401. Alright, after this guard clause, we'll get the slug from query params. So let's do const search params is equal to a new URL rec.url, and again I'll put this side by side. Let me open that, and then we'll grab the slug. It's going to be search params.get slug. We'll also grab the stuff in the body, so const step id updates, as well as update settings, which is a flag that we set in this mutation function, right? The update settings, and we'll say is equal to await rec.json. And we'll do a quick check first. So if there's no slug, we're going to return response.json with an error message that says slug is required, and the status code is 400. And then we can find that page based on what we have so far. So const love page is equal to await prisma, import prisma dot love page dot find unique, where the slug is equal to slug and the user ID is equal to session.user.id. And if for some reason it doesn't exist, we'll just return a response.json with an error message that says page not found, and also the status code of 400. We're going to make a deep copy of the content first. So let's say const updated content is equal to json.parse json.stringify love page content, and I'll explain this in just a second. But let's say if the update settings, so if this flag is true, we'll update the settings at the root level of the content. So say updated content dot settings, and open that, and then spread the updated content dot settings as well as the updates dot settings. Otherwise, we'll just handle the regular step updates, right? Because in both situations, we're calling the same endpoint but passing different data. This is a mutation to save our edits, and this is simply to go to the next step. So this is how we are differentiating the actions. So in the else block, we'll say const step index is equal to updated content dot steps dot find index, and then step dot id is equal to step id. We'll find the step index first, and then if the step index is equal to -1, then we'll just say return response.json with an error message that says step not found and a status code of 404. Otherwise, we'll say updated content dot steps at this step index is equal to spread the updated content dot steps at step index and then updates. And after this if else block, I'll come here and say const updated page is equal to await prisma dot love page dot update, where the condition will be slug user ID is equal to session.user.id, and what we want to update is content will be updated content, and finally we'll return response.json with just the updated content. And quickly in our catch block, we'll say console.error updating love page, and return a response.json with an error message that says something went wrong, and then status code of 500. And sorry, this should be updated page. we want to send the updated page back. And let's scroll up back to where we made a deep copy of the content. So we use JSON.parse and JSON.stringify to create a complete copy of the content object. A regular spread operator like this, right? So ... content. This only creates a shallow copy, which means nested objects will still reference the original data. And because our content has nested steps and options, we need a deep copy to safely modify any level without affecting the original data before saving to our database. All right, let's give that a try, and finger crossed everything works. So if everything works, right, as you can see now, we can hover over and it seems like it's suggesting that I can upload my own image, which is nice, and the next step and whatnot. So if everything works, when I hit next step, my changes will be saved to the database. So when I later come back to revisit this page, it should show my updated content. And because currently in our editable quiz, we only have one case. So when we click the next button, I think it's just going to crash. So let's just put an empty editable question 2 here, just so it doesn't crash. Let's add a case 2. Return this editable question 2. And we can just copy these 2 props pretty much. So paste it here and let's create that. So under editable questions, editable question 2.js file, rfce, and that's fine for now. And don't forget to import this component. And just real quick, before we take that for a test drive, let's come back to our editable question 1. And just below our input field, we have this button, remember? And let's change the text because now we have the is pending state. We'll say is pending. If that's true, we'll show the loader icon from Lucid React with a class name of size 6, animate spin, text gray 500. Otherwise, we'll show a check icon from Lucid React with a class name of size 6, text green 500. All right, let's come back to our page. Let's try edit the text. We see this button shows up because I'm changing the input, right? The value is changing. And I'll change the title to something completely different, just some random letters. And when we click on this button, let's double check what's happening. So we click on this button, it's a submit button inside our form. And now that I'm looking at this, we are missing the on submit is equal to handle submit on submit. We hit the button, it's going to trigger this on submit and we'll construct the payload. The title will be updated because the React hook form is doing some hard work for us behind the scenes. And the save question function will be invoked, which is right here, save function. And we haven't touched the image yet at this point, and the image file by default is null. So it's just going to skip this part and directly come to here and call our endpoint, so the love page update endpoint, and update our title and return the data. And if everything goes well, we'll see a success toast. And this is going to refresh the query, get the latest data, render it, and reset our form, set the preview to null. So let's see if it actually happens. So let's come back here and I'm going to hit the save button. And it says changes saved. Your changes have been saved successfully. Awesome. And just to prove to you that it actually saved to our database, now we can refresh the page and it's still the same edited text. And let's try uploading a new image as well. So let's click on that. Okay, it's prompting me to upload a new image. And as you can see, I can only select the image file. So all the PNGs and the GIFs. So I'm going to choose one of the prepared GIFs and let it upload. And look at that. Our image has been successfully uploaded. And again, if I refresh the page, it should still show my new image. How cool is that?